Now I'd like to present our speaker today is Weihong Wang. Weihong is a professor at Utah Valley University, and I'll turn the time over to her.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's a large audience, so honored to be here, and thank you for being here as well. This is my outline, following a more scientific presentation style. When I was preparing the presentation, I did make an assumption. I assumed everybody knows something about Utah Lake. Am I correct? So that is why I don't really have a big introduction on Utah Lake. So this is like the outline saying why I'm interested in studying Utah Lake and the research questions I would like to address. Methods, some results, and the conclusions. So today's work has been done by a lot of undergraduate research students at UVU, so I'm going to share their work. So why studying Utah Lake? So nutrient sources have been a big concern to a lot of people, not only the management and also local communities, since we hear a lot of media, social media posts or information on Utah Lake regarding the algal blooms. So sometimes it's nice to hear the concern. However, there are a lot of inaccurate information which leads to very concerning perceptions on Utah Lake. So that is one of the reasons why we study Utah Lake. Secondly, Utah Lake is just by UVU, so it's very convenient to conduct student-mentored research. So then it is a natural laboratory for our students. Lastly, as an educator, science is important, but I do believe the awareness of public community is very, very crucial to protect this important ecosystem. So raising public awareness is one of my missions on Utah Lake. I never thought I'm going to do so much work on Utah Lake once I started my job at UVU. But before you know it, I have studied Utah Lake more than 5 years. So this is more focusing on the anthropogenic impact on Utah Lake. So this is Utah Lake watershed. I want to highlight a few things. So we have, I'm sure the laser. So the kind of orange-ish circles around the lake, they are the wastewater treatment plants. So I know a lot of you are expert on the regulations in terms of nitrogen, phosphorus. We know we have a good regulation on nitrogen for a longer time period compared to phosphorus. So most recently, January 1st, 2020, there's a standard on phosphorus, 1 ppm. However, not all the wastewater treatment plants are hitting the target. So we will see in the next few years. I was hopeful all wastewater treatment plants will be able to comply with the standard. So that is one concern, because if we talk about the nutrients, potentially we're getting a lot of nutrients from those wastewater treatment plants. Even though we have secondary treatment in the plants, however, it's really hard to get rid of all nutrients. So that is why it's a major concern. However, my work is not focusing on point sources for the project purpose. It's relatively easy to quantify how much nutrients go into the lake just by daily measurements from the plants. So my focus today is more on non-point sources for phosphorus and nitrogen. So later I'm going to introduce you the method. So in terms of non-point sources, this map shows part of it, the agricultural, the green areas on the map. So Utah Lake has a lot of issues. We all know it. But in my opinion, based on my research and other researchers' work, I do believe is getting better and better by considering all parameters. So if we talk about the algal blooms, so then it is getting better as well. Even though we do have warnings from time to time, but I do want to point out the warnings is more for localized algal blooms. So people's perception by saying the lake is toxic is not accurate. Is also very concerning because it's going to change a lot of people's mind in terms of the future of Utah Lake. So for my research questions, I want to address these few questions. First, I want to clarify land use and the land cover within the Utah Lake watershed and estimate how much nutrients go into the lake from each land use, land cover category. And also try to use Google Earth Engine along with remote sensing to visualize the correlation between the nutrient input and the algal blooms in the lake over time and space. To do so, we do have different methods. First, we started the field measurement monitoring. So we had a lot of students going to the inlets of Utah Lake. We have several major inlets. So for instance, we have Spanish Fork River, Provo River, American Fork River, and one outlet, the Jordan River, which connects Utah Lake and the Great Salt Lake. So we did a quarterly lake sampling. We had 13 locations on the lake. Since we did want to conduct geographic information extrapolation using those data points. And also we had data sampling locations on the major inlets and the outlet. So on the rivers, we have the sampling size at the mouth of the canyon, and also on the same river, we have sampling size near the lake. We want to do a comparison to see potentially how much human activities impacted the nutrient concentration in rivers. We also did, west side water quality measurement. We used the photometer to do in situ measurement on nitrite, nitrate, and ammonia. So besides the field work, we did use geospatial analysis techniques since we are not able to sample every single point. So it's more powerful to use advanced geospatial analysis coupling with the field method. So we did land use, land cover classification, and using Google Earth Engine and remote sensing to visualize the nutrient sources and the distribution of harmful algal blooms in the lake. I'm going to give you some results since when I prepared this presentation, I thought I had a shorter time. However, it could be a good news since you are ready for lunch pretty much. So this one showing the concentration of phosphate, chlorophyll A, and phycocyanin. So on the WSI meters, we do have the sensors to measure both chlorophyll A and phycocyanin. We have the photometer to measure the phosphate concentration. So the reason we want to use phycocyanin because phycocyanin is very specific to cyanobacteria. That is the species we find in the blooms. So that is a more accurate representation of the harmful algal blooms. Chlorophyll A you can find in any green plants. So could be a false signal if we only use chlorophyll A. So for instance, so this one is chlorophyll A, this one is phycocyanin. There are some similarities in terms of the highlighting the algal blooms, but there are also differences. So you can see around here we have like American Fork River coming in, but on the chlorophyll A map didn't really show high concentrations of chlorophyll A. So that is one of the reasons why we try to use phycocyanin when detecting the harmful algal blooms. So this is for non-point sources land use, land cover classification. So we used the Google licensed imagery 2019, which is very high resolution. And then we followed this method in this flow chart. We resampled the cell size, applied green vegetation index, and classified urban vegetation. And then we vectorized the imagery from raster to vector. And then calculated the area for each class we identified. And then we were using an empiric model based on the past studies to calculate how much nutrients run into Utah Lake from each category. It's very interesting for the urban sources, we focused on the 3 categories. We have urban lawns, parks, and we have golf courses. So this is the specific total area of each category. So in addition, we have non-urban sources, which means it's more about the on the bench above the tree line, those areas. So for this classification, we have 6 categories. So for instance, we have herbaceous, pasture, cultivated, deciduous forest, evergreen, and mixed forest. So we use the National Land Cover data set for this classification. So we select the non-urban classes, these 6 here, and vectorized, and then calculated the total area for each land use land cover we identified. So here is the numerical model we used to calculate nutrient input from all categories we worked on. And then we are able to use the total area and then to figure out phosphorus loading and the nitrogen loading to Utah Lake. So I do want to highlight 2 categories, 2 classes. So one is urban lawns, and then one is cultivated crops. So a lot of times it's relatively easy to regulate the point sources. But when coming to non-point sources, it's a challenging question. It's not something easy to implement. It's hard to tell people to do something with their own land. Then it's not easy task to accomplish. But as we can see, those 2 categories represent a large portion of nutrient input to Utah Lake. So from management perspective, probably we could consider some innovative strategies to motivate or to ask help from local communities. So how can we what can we do to help decrease the total amount of nutrients from those categories? So that is why I mentioned at the beginning, science is super important. But the thing is, the management, the implementation of regulations, not that it takes time. So we have to have the local communities on board. So even if we spend so much money into improving the lake water quality and trying to do good to the lake, if people's perception does not change, we don't get them on board. It's really hard task to go forward. So in conclusion, so Utah Lake is not horizontally well mixed. Since it's so shallow, vertically it's well mixed pretty much based on one of our papers on Utah Lake water budget, published in 2020, I believe. And then So the urban lands and then the cultivated crops, those are really important land cover areas to consider in the water quality management for Utah Lake. And the remote sensing GIS and the geospatial techniques can be used very successfully to monitor harmful algal blooms over time. So in the end, I do want to acknowledge a lot of collaborators and students. Again, we have a strong workforce at UVU, so they are the undergraduate researchers. They are really diligent, they are really compassionate, they are very passionate on Utah Lake. So they have done so much work in the field, on the computers, doing modeling. So it's really my pleasure to work with those students. Any questions? Yes, thank you. Before the question, I just want to point out, so this one is the channel from the Orem wastewater treatment plant to Utah Lake. So this picture was taken by a student. So he was using a drone flying over there. So it's really beautiful, but at the same time, we can see potentially if we have like more sheet flow for the effluent before it entering into the lake could be a better solution to improve, to reduce phosphorus and nitrogen.
Okay, so I noticed that the nutrient load was high for urban lawns. Do you suspect that that was coming from fertilizer overspray, grass clipping spread, or was it leaching from the lawn into waterways?
I mean, my understanding could be a combination because my study does not capture stormwater, and really we have the need to do more studies and the management on stormwater, since the stormwater is not going through wastewater treatment plants. It's just entering into the lake directly. So potentially people are using a lot of fertilizers to make sure they have a green lawn. Their lawns are better than their neighbors. At the same time, the leaching is a process could be contributing to the nutrient load into the lake.
So you mentioned using GIS and remote sensing to quantify cyanobacteria blooms over space and through time. I don't think you presented any information about the spatial and temporal changes that we see from one period to the next. Are there any patterns that you've noticed that you could speak to?
Yes, I deleted that slide because I thought that I had like 10-ish minutes to present. We did, so our sampling periods were from 2019 to 2022. And also we downloaded the images from 2019 up to October 23. So our students were able to do some programming in Google Earth Engine to automate the download of the images. So after we applied the equation to visualize the chlorophyll A, so we did find a trend. So from 2019 up to 2023, we saw slightly decrease in terms of the algal bloom distribution in the lake. One suspicion or one reason could be the pandemic impact. So we had less activities on land. We had way more less activities overall during the pandemic period. So we did see the decrease, slight decrease, especially in Provo Bay area and Goshen Bay area in the south. Thank you.
I have a question and a comment. Looking at this slide from a management perspective, it would be really helpful. Like what I'm looking at is like, well, what's the loading per acre for these things? Because I think that helps people, compare. Like, is cultivated crops worse or better? Or is lawns worse than golf courses? So
Yeah.
it gives people target to shoot at. Like if you could say, well, golf courses are only loading this much per acre, and look how green they
Yeah.
are. So I think that per acre would be a really important thing. And then the other question that I've got is the one covered class that's really missing from here is pavement. And I'm just wondering if that's incorporated somehow, or if there's a reason that you left that out, because a non-point source that's coming off of roads and parking lots and things like that can be really significant as well. And I'm just curious what the reasoning was on that.
That is a really great question. I think when we did this analysis specifically, we focused on the green areas, so urban areas and the non-urban. The pavement specifically. That is also again back to the stormwater management, because everything will end up in the stormwater and then go into the lake. So then is another source. Potentially we are not capturing here, since we are focusing on the green vegetation index for the geospatial analysis.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's just kind of a function of the analysis.
Yeah. So yeah, then it could be really important future project for people to work on. I really believe stormwater collects a lot of nutrients, and then it will end up in Utah Lake. Thanks for the comment and the question.
I've got a similar question. So, when you have these different units or whatever, did you look at the top and bottom, for example, of the deciduous forest, and then from there to the urban? So did you separate those by your sampling sites, or was it like literature data on what kind of landscape characteristics load? Or
So
both?
yeah, so we didn't really sample those areas, the categories, because it's really impossible to sample all areas. We need to go back to here for a second. So for these categories, a lot of times we need to separate the background land use, land cover, which means like the forest areas, those areas with minimum human impact. We didn't sample anything. We did use the empirical model published by other researchers, which means we could potentially improve our estimate if we have more a better model, which means more applying to the West, for instance. So this model is more, the model we used is more like a nationwide, which could be errors, could lead to errors. So since the soil types are very different, then it could be something we are going to, we were thinking to refine our model just to try to figure out different empirical models in the study. Yeah, we didn't really sample those land use, land cover categories. We just classified using the Landsat imagery, and then we used the empirical model to quantify how much.
Did you find any sort of like relationship between the loading that you predicted with this model and the quarterly sampling that you did in the lake?
So the quarterly sampling we did on the lake only showing us a composite concentration, which means we don't really know exactly which portion is from which source. You know what I mean? So it's like we are trying to see the end product in the lake. The thing is, so we cannot really tell if it's one source coming has more impact. Is that what you were referring to, or?
Yeah, I guess so. Like, I guess I was wondering if you have the amount of land area for these different land classifications, and the amount of nutrients coming off of them. I guess you might be able to predict
Which areas we will have higher concentration.
Yeah.
So That is a great question. So in general, near the inlet, which means where the river dumping water into the lake, depending on which river we're talking about, depending on the location of the river. So for instance, Spanish Fork River is surrounded by agricultural areas. So if I have to make assumption, potentially we are seeing a lot of cultivated land, nutrient into that river, and for the Provo River, in Provo Bay area, we have like 3 wastewater treatment plants, for instance, and also there are also agricultural areas as well. So there are different. There are some details we can come up just by analyzing which type of land use, land cover around the river, since the river really delivering the water into the lake along with the nutrients. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then we'll just do like 2 more questions.
So in one of the earlier slides, there was an overview map showing the water treatment plants along the lake. And I noticed that in the red, it is also showing mining sites. I was wondering if there was, beyond trace metals, was there any sign of nutrient loading or anything coming from that? Or is that a little bit beyond the scope of this particular study?
It's another project. The reason I put down the mining sites because when I was teaching GS, I was asking students to put the points on the map. So yeah, we have another separate project working on trace metal and heavy metal. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
You said that you used some national calculation values to determine the actual runoff quantity. Did you look at what can be done to reduce those quantities from the various landscapes? And then secondly, on your measurements that you made, you mentioned that you used orthophosphorus as your measurement for the phosphorus. Did you look at the ratios of ortho to total phosphorus and particularly what organic components were included?
Let me answer the second question first, since I heard it last. No, we didn't. But then it's something we could look into. Going back to the first question, you were asking, looking at the categories, if there's something we can do to reduce the nutrient loading to the lake. Isn't that correct? So here is the one thing we need to keep in mind. There are always background nutrient loading to the lake. We cannot do much, which means the soil type is there. There are always background nutrient loading into the lake. In my opinion, based on the studies we have done, I feel like the urban areas, we can do more for urban areas. So for instance, the lawns, the parks, the golf courses, and also the cultivated land, like the agricultural areas. But then it could be something hard to accomplish. It takes a long time, likely, for people to change their practices. Yeah. Thank you so much for the question.
All right, I think we have time for one more quick question.
So I'm not a firm believer in HABs because Utah Lake really doesn't have very many HABs. The lake is so shallow that the silt brought up from the bottom, and every time it blows, the wind blows, those HABs are mostly limited to inside marinas or in Provo Bay or someplace like that. But we keep getting these warnings that this fake news that, oh, Utah Lake's going to kill us all, and so the dogs especially. So anyway, could you comment on the relationship between the HABs and what you're talking about here?
So totally, I really like your question. That is another thing I forgot to mention. Algal blooms or even harmful algal blooms, they are very common in all lakes or even a marine ecosystem. So it's not something unique to Utah Lake. we cannot really go back in time. Even before the pioneer settlement, I do believe the algal blooms happening in the lake. However, the focus here is with the booming population growth in Utah Valley. So how can we try to make sure we're not really dumping more and more nutrients? So something can we do? Yes, I do believe we can do something, especially with the management approach. If we are smart, if we are taking on sustainable strategies and educate our local communities, we could really maintain a balance. Sometimes you see the warnings, yes, it's very alarming. So that is why if we are able to practice the management and get the local community on board, I do believe you are right. Nothing new. Harmful or algal blooms, they are really everywhere, happening every single year. It's not unique to Utah Lake at all. So that is why if people understand what's really going on, the science behind it, they're not going to be scared. So Utah Lake is such a great resource. It's for recreational purposes, it's for agricultural purposes. In the future, I don't know, maybe we have to rely on Utah Lake for water source, for like drinking water. I don't know if it's going to happen, but yeah, Utah Lake is very important. But we are not really looking at a problem in the valley. We are looking at the resource. Everybody needs to take care of it. Thank you.